Mexico's midterm elections have been riddled with extreme violence, with literally dozens of politicians, including political candidates, getting murdered. Now, Mexico held its largest election in its history, with voters choosing all 500 representatives in the Chamber of Deputies, as well as governors in 15 states, representatives for 30 local legislatures, and 1,200 other posts. So this is a huge election. The one person who isn't on the ballot is the president, right? So Obrador, also known as AMLO, was not on the ballot, but this was largely seen as a referendum on his leadership. Now, I want to give you the results of the election and all of that in just a second. But it's important to know just how incredibly dangerous it is to be a politician in Mexico that specifically wants to root out corruption and crime. Take a look.
Mexico's midterm elections have been marred by one of its bloodiest campaigns, even in a country known for its drug cartel wars and soaring homicides. Some observers report that the number of election-related deaths is close to 150. On Sunday, a severed head was thrown into a polling station and 5 election workers were shot dead.
We believed
that this new government would change things, but in the end, it's the most corrupt. More than 90 candidates have been killed in this election period. So I think it's very important to go out and vote. Myself and everyone around me are very angry.
So that one voter says this is the most corrupt because of all the crime that's been taking place. But the crime in Mexico has been a problem for literally decades. And it's an incredibly difficult problem to solve. And obviously it's not just about policy within Mexico. It has a lot to do with policies that the United States has pushed, how much NAFTA, for instance, has ravaged the country of Mexico. So you really need to take all of that into consideration when commenting on the issue of violence. But the one thing that we do know is it appears that the Morena party, which is the party that AMLO is from, is going to maintain a majority in Congress, but it does not have a supermajority anymore. A supermajority means that you have at least 2/3 of the representatives from your party, and they did lose some seats, and as a result, they still have the majority, but no longer have a supermajority. And also Mexico's opposition parties, this is an important element to the story. Opposition parties opted to run on a joint ticket in most states and largely centered its campaign trying to convince voters to grant them a majority in the lower house, but failed in its effort to win enough support to impede the president's agenda in Congress. I mention that because AMLO happens to be so popular that his opponents had to join in a joint ticket in order to attempt to beat him, or beat his party, and they failed to do so.
Yeah, I want to give you context there. His party did not even exist 10 years ago. It's now so popular that it's shocking that he didn't get more than half the parliament, which is incredibly difficult to do in any parliamentarian system. So yes, they clearly lost these elections. But they still have huge popularity overall, and combined with another left-wing party, still have a very comfortable majority in Mexico. Less comfortable than it was before, but they still hold the parliament. And he was not on the ballot. So those are important facts to consider for context. But I also want to give him credit for one thing. So he had criticized corruption in the country, but also the Electoral Commission. Now, they lost fairly big here, losing about 60 seats is a lot of seats, even though they're still in power. He said, but unlike and this is Obrador himself, he said, unlike in previous times, the state did not intervene. The people spoke, they decided who should represent them. So there he is, basically losing an election and saying, and he has had issues in the past with the Electoral Commission saying, no, they did a good job. We did lose. See, Donald Trump could take a note or two from that, right? He didn't go to court 60 times. He didn't bring pillows and random things and go, no, I was cheated. I'm going to Mar-a-Lago and crying for the rest of my life. No, he's like, no, we lost and it was a fair election. And so I applaud that. Now, one more thing about Mexico. It's unfortunate that when you run on a campaign of, AMLO talked about hugs, not bullets, right? To try to end the violence. And it's happened here in America too, when prosecutors and attorney generals have set a run on a progressive ticket saying, let's end the violence. The minute there's any crime, the right wing gets to turn around and go, see, it didn't work.
Right.
It didn't work. We still need bullets, right? And fear, unfortunately, is the primary driver of voters. And so they use that against them. And it partly worked here. I'm very curious to see what's gonna happen when he's on the ballot in the next set of elections. But right now, the left still controls, and it's still very popular among especially the poor and the middle class in Mexico.
Yes, exactly. Now, he is not popular with business interests. So I do want to talk about his leadership in Mexico thus far, because there is a lot of pro-business, anti-AMLO propaganda out there. And so I want to just quickly go over some of the highlights, some of the issues within his leadership so far. So first, let me just note that again, his opponents represent the best interests of businesses, and Obrador has been very clear in wanting to nationalize, various industries within Mexico, including their oil and gas industry. Now, in the 1980s, huge parts of Mexico began to go from the public sector to the private sector. So parts of the country started to become privatized, and there were huge downsides to that. For instance, even though they have their own fossil fuels, their own natural resources, Mexico ends up importing oil from other places, including Texas. So when the Texas disaster happened recently with extremely cold weather and obviously the equipment not being weatherized for that cold weather, Mexico was harmed by that just as people in Texas were harmed by it. So why are the people of Mexico relying on fossil fuels from Texas? That makes no sense. Now, AMLO, as the president is commonly known, has made the fight against corruption a centerpiece of his administration and focused on implementing social programs for the country's students, seniors, indigenous communities, and other low-income people. That's why he's so popular with them. Now, the Mexican president has also pushed for the recovery of the state oil company, Pemex, as part of his effort to recover energy sovereignty and redistribute the country's wealth. So the rich despise him. Other things that he's done includes expansions in education to ensure that education is a guarantee for all Mexican people. In regard to the economy, as I mentioned, he does not want to allow private investment in the Mexican Petroleum Company, and that's why private investors despise him. He also implemented a wage increase for workers by 16.21% in 2019, and then another 20% months later. So all of these things certainly factor into the negative commentary and the anti-AMLO propaganda that you're likely to see in some of the mainstream news outlets, including here in the United States, by the way.
Yeah, so look, everybody's on a different part of the political spectrum, and I think that Venezuela the leadership of Venezuela has gone too far in actually hurting the economy and actually hurting business in an unproductive way. And that is also because of corruption. And yes, you can have left-wing corruption. But AMLO, I think, strikes the right balance. All he's saying is, look, it's our oil. We should treat it like it's our oil. Why should we give it to companies and they take all the profits? It doesn't make any sense. And so now who's objecting to that? The companies, of course, right? But that actually does look out for the people of Mexico. And so whenever you have someone like that in power, that is significantly left-wing, just meaning looking out for the people of Mexico, you're gonna have massive pushback in the media, because the media is usually controlled by very rich people. It's usually run by mega corporations in most countries. Now here in America, we've been able to carve out a little bit of independent media, as you see here, us doing this, right? But in the bad old days, before online started, and still they dominate to this day, the media is run by giant, multi-billion-dollar corporations. So when a candidate like Bernie Sanders says, hey, maybe we should have universal health care like every other developed nation, the corporate media roars back, it's socialism. Remember Chris Matthews talking about getting executed in Central Park, et cetera, because people wanted to get health care to every American, right? And that's A version of that is happening in Mexico. Oh my God, socialism. Now they just want your oil to be your oil instead of my oil. Can you believe it? We hate. Now, of course, they don't say it that way. They, oh my God, crime is out of control. Fear, 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 fear. And that's what drives people. So be wary of corporate media in all of these countries. Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.